everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is going to be a little bit different from what my normal topics are. It's very personal and something that I've thought about posting for a long time, but it's my breastfeeding journey. So if this does not appeal to you, then you may have clicked on the wrong video, but I've made this video in an attempt to be an encouragement to someone else. When I was pregnant and right after I had had my baby, I found these videos to be super helpful and just chock full of information that I found out or that I didn't find out in reading and preparing. So it's just something that I would like to share with you. I also would like to go ahead and tell you I only breastfed my baby for the first 6 weeks of her life, and I'll kind of go through why we had to stop and why we made the decision to go to formula. She just turned 7 months old on Friday, but it was a very emotional decision and something that I didn't come to lightly. I really wanted to breastfeed her for much longer than what I got the chance to. But it's just, there are a lot of things that I didn't know going in that I wish I had. So I would just like to share those things with you. Also, my little one woke up from her nap early, so she's in the floor, so if you hear playing with her toy, so if you hear little movements, that's what's going on there. But I'll start with just a little bit of back information. I feel much more confident going into new situations when I know as much about the new topic as possible. So when I was expecting, I did tons of reading. I read the What to Expect book. I also would highly suggest getting the book after What to Expect when you're expecting. I think it's called My First Years. And that has tons of information about breastfeeding, and I wish that I had read that prior to starting my breastfeeding journey. I had also done a breastfeeding class, which I think is wonderful, and I would highly suggest doing that. The lactation consultant who actually taught that class was also employed by the hospital where I was delivering. So I felt like that was great. I knew that I would have the opportunity to see her again when I was in the hospital. And I went with a list full of questions. So when D-Day arrived, when I was ready to deliver, I felt really knowledgeable. I didn't go in expecting everything to come easy. I had heard lots of different stories for women, and I feel like the important thing to note is that every single woman is different, every single baby is different, and each experience is different too. So I gleaned from the knowledge of all of the women that I listened to, but I knew that each situation was probably going to be different, and there would probably be hiccups along the way, or it may go wonderfully. I know a lot of women who it was like breathing, it was a natural thing, they picked it up easily, and so I was like, maybe I could be one of those people too. But I also knew that not to get too discouraged if it didn't come like right in the beginning. Something else that I will note here, because it's just something that I didn't know about pregnancy, and again, I felt very knowledgeable about pregnancy. My mom's a nurse, my grandmother, 2 of my aunts, so I knew a lot about delivery and pregnancy just from listening to them. But something that I didn't know is that you can actually start producing colostrum and leak colostrum much earlier in your pregnancy before delivery. I actually started leaking colostrum on my right side at 14 weeks pregnant, which I was shocked by. It was just a small amount, not very much at all, but that was something that surprised me. And I know for sure by 27 weeks pregnant, I was definitely leaking colostrum on both sides. In the delivery room, I just remember the nurses remarking, they were like, you already have colostrum, like you have a lot of colostrum, because it was actually leaking through my gown. When she was born, within the first hour afterwards, the lactation consultant who had been the teacher at the breastfeeding class had actually come in. She reintroduced herself, and she was so encouraging and happy, and I was thrilled. I had just had this baby, and I was so overwhelmed with joy and just excited, and she was like, do you want to go ahead and try to get latched on? And I was like, absolutely, let's try this. They were still working on me and still doing things, and so I was like, absolutely. I was doing skin to skin with her. She was able to get the baby latched on. She was able to help me get her latched on within that first hour. She probably ate for 5 minutes. It was very easy, an odd sensation, but very easy. And I was feeling like $1,000,000. I was like, this is the most amazing thing. She was able to get her latched on. This is so great. So, getting her latched on by myself was a bit of a challenge. In the middle of the night, it had been, I was calling the nurses in to help me, and they were able to get us latched. Anyways, I was able to get her latched each time, but I was definitely having to have help. It was just something that we were struggling with a little bit. The next morning I had, or it may have been 2 mornings after she was born, it was right before we left to go home, I had one of the other lactation consultants come in, and she made the comment, she said, oh great, like it looks great, you've been feeding her every 3 hours, getting a lot of like good time in, and she was like, do you mind if I go? I had requested more help because I just wasn't feeling confident. I wasn't feeling like I could get her latched on by myself. And throughout all of my research, I will also say, I cannot stress to you how many times I had heard getting a good latch is the most important thing. So each time I'm like trying to make sure that the baby is taking in like as much of the breast as possible. So sorry, the battery on my camera died. So yes, during that time I was trying to make sure that I was getting a really good latch, that everything, that I was doing everything I knew to do to succeed in breastfeeding. And the lactation consultant was helping me, let's, sit up straight, let's make sure we've got plenty of support and pillows, make sure that you're comfortable, that you're at ease. She was going through the motions of making sure that I had her positioned correctly. And then when we actually went to make contact, she said, oh, you've almost got like a little sore spot on your right side, where like something must not be right there. Let's go ahead and look at that further. And that's when she had made the discovery. She said, you have what's called flat nipples. Never in any of my research had I heard of that term, or had I heard of like women having flat or inverted nipples. And I was just like, what does that mean? And she said, well, it just means that your nipple doesn't protrude further from the breast, and that sometimes it can be harder for the baby to actually get a good latch, because in order to get a good latch, the baby has to draw the nipple farther back in their mouth. Otherwise, it hits the hard spot at the top of the baby's mouth, and it causes the mom pain, and also the baby's not getting like a full gulp of milk. So in order to help me as I was like having this little sore spot on the right side, she offered me what's called a nipple shield. They're made by Medela. She measured me for the right size nipple shield. They have a bunch of different kind, and I actually was in the smallest size, the extra small, and I don't have particularly small breasts. It's just apparently nipples come in every size too, and it has nothing to do with your breast size. It's just it can just be the size that you were born with. And I've since then learned that several of my friends have had the same situation too, but I had never at that time heard of it in all of the breastfeeding stories that I had been told or had watched on YouTube or had learned about. It was just a term that had not come up, and it had not come up in my breastfeeding class either. So as soon as we used the shield, she was able to latch on immediately. There was no discomfort for me, and I will say there had been discomfort, and I feel like it's hard to know whether or not it's just your body toughening up, like, because obviously you're not used to someone feeding on you all the time, so there is like a little bit of a learning curve for your body to toughen up to a certain extent, but then you're also told that breastfeeding shouldn't hurt. So I think for me there was a hard decision-making process of, is this actually pain? Is there something wrong? Or is this just my body's way of like toughening up a little bit? I wasn't in excruciating pain, but there was definitely a little bit of like, ooh, okay, that's different. So anyway, she gave me the shield, and she was there for a long time. She was in the room for over 2 hours going through all this information, and I was just on information overload by the end of it. And it's not her fault. She was doing her job, and she was very kind. All of the lactation consultants that I had were so kind, and answering any questions that I had, but I almost felt like I had just had like a golf lesson, like keep this arm straight and hold this hand here, and I felt a little bit overwhelmed by information, but I felt like this nipple shield she had given me was just like the answer to everything. Yes, I felt like the nipple shields were my answer to prayer. And she probably went through the instructions with me, but to be honest, I really don't remember anything about what she told me about how long to use them or how to clean them. And like I said, she very well probably did go through it. It was just a ton of information. I had just been through a lot. I was tired. But she gave me tons of literature to take home, to read. Little one did not want to sit on the floor, so she's now sitting in my lap for the rest of this story. But yes, so the lactation consultant had sent home tons of information. When I got home, everything went very smoothly as far as using the nipple shield. I was like, this is great. There was no pain. When my milk came in, and it was probably 3 days after she was born, the shield helped me get her latched on. She had no trouble whatsoever going from like not having the shield to having one. And like I said, it was really just like a godsend. I was like, why don't all women use this that are having struggles? And she had actually gained weight. She had a first doctor's appointment 3 days after we left the hospital, and she had gained back several ounces. And so I was feeling like, yes, we have got this. I have got the answer to things. I was feeling on top of the world, and I had continued on like that for probably 2 or 3 weeks. And then I finally was going through all of the paperwork that I had been sent home from the hospital, came across where the lactation consultant had put this information in a little packet. And one of the things that it had said was that that nipple shields, number one, should be sterilized like twice a day, I think, by boiling in water for 20 minutes each, which I definitely had not been doing, number one. And then number two, it had said that they're really not meant to be used for longer than a week at a time. Like, in other words, these shields were only supposed to be used to help you get over having a cracked nipple or a sore spot on your breast. It was supposed to decrease the pain so you could continue to breastfeed, and then you were supposed to take them off. The reasoning for that is that sometimes there's not as great of a suction, and that the baby can't actually take in as much of the breast as possible, so it could decrease your milk supply. So immediately I started worrying. I called the lactation consultant at that point, and I explained my situation, and she said, you know, the idea is to try to get mothers so that it's just mother and baby and there's not a shield in between. But at the same time, if you're having pain, we would rather you have the shield and get to breastfeed than not at all. And she was like, I would really try making the effort to try to start feeding on one side, and then if she doesn't want to latch on, or if she has a really hard time latching on, then use the shield after that, but try to make the effort at the beginning of each feeding. And so that's what I was trying to do. At the same time, I felt like her weight she wasn't growing as fast as what I thought she should. We had gone to the doctor at her 4-week appointment, and she had gained weight, but it wasn't a ton of weight. She was in like the 26th percentile gaining. I became obsessed with how much she was gaining, and it's hard because you don't know how much they're eating. You're hoping that each feeding they're taking in a good amount, but they're just not. You can't see exactly how much they're eating, and when you're the sole provider of keeping this child alive, you just feel like, is she hungry? And you know, I'm counting like how many wet diapers and dirty diapers, and my level of worry over how much she was getting was just, I was really nervous about it. And at the doctor's office, when she had, was in the 26th percentile, they had said, she's still fine. If at the 2-month appointment, if she hasn't gained a lot more, then we can, talk about what to do at that point. She's still fine. My husband was also super encouraging during this whole time. He was like, stop worrying. Don't, it's not a big deal. Like, the doctor said she was fine. But in my mind, I was just, I just didn't want her to be hungry, and I wanted her to be healthy. And I don't know, you just see babies like with fat little chunky cheeks and fat little thighs, and I just worried about that. So anyways, we continued on. I was really struggling with trying to take the nipple shields off and breastfeed without them. I was able to get her latched on, but it was very hit or miss with how long she was feeding. I should also point out I was doing the Moms on Call schedule at this time, and I highly suggest it for sleep training. The schedule just, she was sleeping through the night great. She was only waking up like once or twice. And I think that the schedule is fantastic for getting your child to sleep. But as far as being a breastfeeding friendly schedule, I don't know that it's necessarily the best. Sometimes I wish I wouldn't have been as rigid on getting her on a schedule, because with breastfeeding, it's more on demand. It's just, you know, they don't always take in the same amount each time. And I was trying to space things out and do like the book said. And, you know, the book has recommendations for how long they should be eating at this point. And, you know, she was taking longer to eat, and I was like, is there something wrong? I second guessed so many of my decisions. As a first-time mom, you just don't want to do anything wrong, and when it comes to their nutrition and how much they're gaining and they're growing so much, you're nervous about that. And maybe not all moms are, but I know that that was something that had really worried me. So moving forward, I had gotten really worried about my supply and how much she was having. I also think that I was trying to pump way too early. That's something that I wish that I would have waited. I think I started pumping when she was 2 weeks old, and I thought, oh, I'll have this great supply of pumped breast milk, and then that way if I need to go get my hair done or whatever, whoever's watching her will have plenty of milk. And I think I just tried to do that way too early. I never got more than 1 to 2 ounces of pumped milk. And I never really found out when I should pump either, because each time I would feed her, I would try to pump like an hour or so later, and I wasn't getting anything. And then when it was time to feed her again, I felt like I didn't have a supply to feed her. So it was just, I just never felt confident with it. And just the anxiety of her gaining weight or not gaining weight was really taking its toll. So in my concern for how much milk I was producing, as I had said, I'd never pumped more than 2 ounces at a time. I think maybe 2.5 was the most I had ever gotten from both breasts. I had made the decision to go cold turkey with the nipple shields and take them off, because I felt like that was hindering my supply and how much milk I had. So I was like, I don't want to do that. We're just going to figure this out. And, you know, if I have pain from having flat nipples, then we'll just figure it out. I'll deal with the pain, and eventually, like, they'll be drawn out far enough to where maybe it won't hurt or whatever. Like, I was ready to endure whatever pain it was, because I wanted to make sure she was getting enough to eat. So we went cold turkey, and that proved to be disastrous. My nipple couldn't be drawn back far enough in the back of her mouth for it not to cause pain for me. She was having a harder time getting latched on, like, period. Like, I kept working with it and kept trying to figure it all out. And it was just frustrating her. It turned into like all out like screaming fits, sometimes trying for her to get latched on because she was hungry and ready to eat, but couldn't get things together. So it was traumatic, but again, I was determined. I was like, we will figure this out. This is just a hard road we're going through. And this would have been about 5 weeks in, and I noticed that I was getting, I had a clogged duct on the right side, and it was just a hard sore spot. And I think it's just where she had not been able to really draw out enough of the milk for it to work. So I kept having a clogged duct that kept coming back in the same spot. And I would work the duct out, I would, clear it, and then it would come back shortly thereafter. So I kept working on it, I kept trying to pump, and yeah, same spot, just kept coming back all the time. So that eventually developed into mastitis, And I had read about mastitis. I knew the symptoms of it. And it was one of those things where the fever that accompanies mastitis, and for those of you who don't know, it's an infection in your milk duct that causes flu-like symptoms. But I started with a fever, and I would notice the fever at night when I went to lay down, and I was freezing. It was a cold, like I could not get warm. And just started feeling really, really bad during the day, like almost feeling like I could pass out. I was having to force myself to eat, and I quickly realized, I was like, I think that this has turned into mastitis. I need to go see the doctor. So, like I said, it was, I guess it was close to, it was like right at the 6-week mark when I decided to go, because the knot that was on my breast at this point was very painful. I couldn't get it to go away. I was doing everything I needed to do. And the night before I actually went to go see the doctor, I was trying to feed her in the middle of the night and was in such excruciating pain. My husband looked at me and he was like, he didn't ever say, are you sure you want to keep doing this? But he just was upset to see me in pain. During the middle of the night, he just looked at me, and it was bothering him to see me in so much pain. And I think he was just like, is there anything that I can do? Is there anything that I can get for you to help you not be in pain? And he had been with me throughout the whole ordeal. He listened to me worry about how much she weighed, and I was definitely over the top about that. Yeah, the whole thing just became a lot, and to have the mastitis, just I was feeling like a giant failure. Like, just felt like I couldn't win for trying. When I went into the doctor's office, she said, yes, this is definitely mastitis. And she was like, I was like, is this an abscess that has formed on my breast, because it was such a hard knot? And she was like, I think that this is just part of the mastitis. If this doesn't go away with the antibiotic or get better, or if it gets bigger or the pain gets worse, come back to see me next week. At that point, I had pretty well made the decision that I can't keep going on like this. And for some reason in my mind, it was all or nothing. And now looking back on it, I'm like, why didn't I just supplement with formula to take care of my fears about how much she was gaining? But hindsight's always 20/20. You can always look back on things and be like, why was that such a concern for me at the time? But I also think that the mastitis, how bad I was feeling, coupled with just hormones that you have after pregnancy and caring for this new little person, even though I loved her more than life itself, I do love her more than life itself, and I thankfully never experienced postpartum depression or baby blues. I just felt terrible, and I didn't feel like mentally I could take any more worry about her well-being. So we made the decision about that time to switch to formula. I didn't even know what kind of formula to get for her or to buy her, but I left the doctor's office. And she also mentioned I cried at the doctor's office, like just boo-hooed in front of my doctor, and again felt like I couldn't hold it together. And my doctor was so sweet, and she was like, you're not starving your baby, like it's okay. And she was like, don't feel like you're the only one who's come in here crying in front of me. But it was really hard. It was very, very hard. Like, even thinking about it now, it was the first time in my life that I felt like I had prepared for something really hard, and then to feel like you failed at it. Just, it's one thing when you're in school to not study for something and go into a test or whatever not prepared, and then to not do well on it. When you've put in the effort and you're used to getting the reward from it, it can be really hard to feel like you've put in the effort to breastfeed and then it not be wonderful and it not produce what you wanted it to. it turns out I did have to go back to the doctor a week later, and the mastitis had turned into an abscess on my breast, which is a little bit more severe. They actually have to surgically drain that typically, and the antibiotics that they put you on afterwards, you actually can't breastfeed with those antibiotics. I also found out that the fluid that they had drained, it was a staph infection. It was MRSA. So I don't know if I would have been able to even breastfeed having staph infection. Like, to me, that was just like huge red flags. Like, it has to stop. So it was a very big ordeal. It was very emotional. I probably cried for 3 days. And I don't say that lightly. It just, I think coupled with how sick I was, and also just taking care of this new little person, just it takes a lot of it out of you. And I don't know, it was a very emotional thing. So I say all this not to be a discouragement, but I think for me it would have been better, now looking back on things, to have kept using the nipple shields, and also to supplement with formula if I felt like she wasn't gaining enough, and to not feel like a failure for that. I think that it just, in my head, it was all or nothing. It was either it all has to be breast milk, or it all has to be formula. And I'm a big proponent in fed is best, and I think prior to breastfeeding, I felt like so many women gave up breastfeeding just because it was inconvenient to them, or it was slightly just, uncomfortable. And I just feel like there's so much more to it than what I knew, and I have a newfound respect for women who do make it a year. Trying to plan around a baby's feeding in the very beginning can be very overwhelming, and you can feel very alone because of it, or just very confined to the house when you're there, because babies have to eat a lot when they're first born. And I was loving every minute of it, but it was something that was just, if you try to go out of the house, like we were having to time it, errands had to be like an hour or under in order for me to get back to feed her and feel comfortable feeding her at the house. And I'm sure not everyone was like that, and maybe I'm silly for feeling that way. I never fully embraced like being able to feed her in public and not feel uncomfortable. And the whole point of being able to feed your baby is to be comfortable, and to be, to not have that stress of being too tense. So I would just take that into consideration too, like have a game plan of if you are uncomfortable, what to do to overcome that, so that you can get out of the house, so that you can feel like things are going well. And then the last thing that I'll say too about this video, because I know that it's ridiculously long, is that don't feel like you have to do much of anything else other than feed this baby and keep the baby clean. And I say that because I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to do things around the house. I felt like I was just a lazy bum, like sitting on the couch and just feeding, and that was it. But really, that's all you can do in the very beginning, and maybe it's different after you have multiple children. But it took us a long time before I got into a routine where I felt like I had it together enough to be able to do things, to be able to clean the house, to be able to cook a big meal. And thankfully I have a very understanding husband who doesn't expect all of those things. I was really worried that people were going to come to our house and were going to judge me for it being really dirty. And I can remember being mortified. One of my aunts and grandmothers came, and they had never seen the upstairs of our house, and I had tried to keep the downstairs somewhat picked up, but our bedroom was a wreck. Other rooms in the house were a wreck. And I can just remember being mortified, like them walking through my house. And now looking back on it, I'm like, they're family, like they understand. Don't feel bad if it takes you a while to get a routine, and to get to where you feel like things are more put together. So I hope this video is an encouragement. I know it's super long, and we will see y'all in the next video. Thank you so much. Bye.